Good evening. Welcome to the Pullman City Council meeting for this Tuesday, July 12th. Thank you for being here today. And first of all, let's take roll.
Mayor Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Benjamin. Councilmember Dubin. Councilmember Guido.
Here.
Councilmember McCall.
Here.
Councilmember Parks.
Here.
Councilmember Weller.
Present.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Both Francis Benjamin and Becky Dubin notified us they could not be here tonight. Do I hear a motion to excuse?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That we now go to our community announcements. We have posted on our website that there is an opening for Civil Service Commission. That's a three-person commission. They meet in the mornings once a month. And in the past, we've had to be very specific on what political party. Right now, we have a political party from each side. So we are taking any applicant of either party. So if you want to apply for that, for the Civil Service Commission, please do. Rainy Park Pool, right now the splash pad is closed for repairs at this time. Don't have a date as to when that's going to be fixed. Concert in the Parks opens tomorrow with the Community Band of the Palouse. Starts at 6 o'clock at Rainy Park. Movies in the Park opens Friday with Encanto. It starts at dusk at Rainy Park. Free popcorn and snow cones. You better get there early for the snow cones, just in case it's 90 degrees again. So, Pitch, Hit, and Run. It's a free event presented by the MLB Network. It's on Saturday, 9 o'clock at City Playfields, ages 7 to 14. Registration is required. You can learn more about it by visiting the Parks and Recreation, the City of Pullman website. Resurfacing on Terreview Drive from State Route 270 to Airport Road finished on July 1st, 1 week ahead of schedule. We're still celebrating that. Thank you to Motley and Motley that did a lot of the work there in our City Public Works Department. Great supervision on that. Accelerated streets, resurfacing along stretches of Southwest Center Street, Southwest City View Street starts on Monday. The Albion Road SR 27 roundabout completion date has now been pushed back to August 11th, and the Terreview Drive roundabout at North Fairway Road is on schedule to finish by August 19th. You can visit traffic control webpage on the City of Pullman website. Regular meeting of the City Council will be held again next week on July 19th. And we might mention that Gary Jenkins, as you all know, is retiring at the end of the month. And they're going to be a celebration for him at the SEL Event Center on July 27th. That's a Wednesday from 3 to 6, and all are invited. And those are the announcements tonight. With that, speaking of Gary Jenkins, he's going to give us a report tonight on red light cameras. This is something the council had asked questions about. Gary's done his research and ready to go for his red light camera presentation.
Well, I did one better. I got a researcher to do the research. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. So one of the 2022-23 City Council adopted goals and priorities and listed under other priority is to research and discuss installation of red light cameras. A research fellow for the past 3 years, WSU doctoral student Megan Parks, previously conducted research on this topic and presented her research to the Pullman Police Advisory Committee. Due to the recently adopted priority by City Council, Megan has revised her presentation with updated research in Pullman-specific research and a focus on potential implementation in Pullman. So with that, I'll turn it over to Megan.
Another great example of working with WSU in research. So Megan, thank you.
Yes. So, hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Megan Parks. I'm a graduate student at WSU in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice, and as Chief Jenkins mentioned, the Public Safety Research Fellow. I'm going to be talking about red light cameras. This is an updated presentation that I've talked to the Police Advisory Committee about before. So this is just an outline of what I want to kind of go over tonight. I do want to emphasize that this is an overview for time's sake, and my goal is really to just summarize and provide insight into a pretty complex topic. This is a description of what red light cameras are. You can just take a glance at that. I'm not going to go through every detail in there, but just a few points that I want to highlight. Every picture is reviewed by either a police officer or a trained employee to verify that it is in fact a traffic violation. One of the concerns about red light cameras is that they are an invasion of privacy, but that's usually countered with the argument that driving is a regulated activity happening on public roads. And other concerns about privacy have to do with the possibility that red light camera data may be accessible by third-party vendors, and that there's potentially misuse of that data by the criminal justice system. Summarizing the costs associated with red light cameras it's a challenging thing to do because they vary for several reasons. They can be based on equipment choices, operational and administrative characteristics of a program, and arrangements with contractors. I was able to find one example from Salem, Oregon, where one red light camera at one intersection was costing $4,922 a month. There is one research study that also supports that cameras are about $5,000 per month. So there is a revised Code of Washington that governs the use of automated traffic safety cameras. Again, I'm not going to go through every detail of this RCW. I don't want to spend too much time on these details, but I wanted to highlight a few points. First, an analysis of the potential camera locations must be prepared, and they can only be implemented at intersections with 2 or more arterials with appropriate yellow light durations, which is also governed by an RCW. Cameras can only take pictures of the vehicle and the license plate, and they shouldn't reveal the faces of the people inside. The compensation paid to the red light camera vendor or the manufacturer may not be based on a portion of fine or civil penalties imposed or any of the revenue generated. And lastly, camera locations must be marked 30 days prior to activation. Fines cannot exceed fine amounts for other parking infractions, and registered owners are responsible for the fines. These citations do not become part of the driving record, and they do not impact insurance rates. And I also just wanted to make a note that there's some details included in the RCW that are specific to pilot programs. So this is an overview of red light camera deployment. On the left side is a list of cities in Washington that currently have red light camera programs. This data is from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, which I'll now call IIHS from here on out. And then the graph on the right shows the number of communities with red light camera programs in the US between 1992 and 2020. The peak was around 2010 with over 500 communities using red light cameras. And the number started to decline in 2012. And you can see that by 2020, the number has dropped to 345. So why are these numbers going down? Although new red light camera programs continue to be added, the total number has declined since 2012 because more programs have actually been discontinued than have been initiated. Commonly cited reasons for turning cameras off include a reduction in camera citations, difficulty sustaining the financial viability of the program, and community opposition. I do want to mention that there's been 2 studies conducted suggesting that when camera programs are discontinued, crash rates actually increased. So red light cameras are implemented to address a really serious traffic safety problem. In the United States in 2020, 928 people were killed in crashes that involved red light running, and an estimated over 115,000 people were injured in red light running crashes. Because we know that police officers are not able to monitor every intersection 24/7, these cameras are then implemented as a solution to that problem. The goals of red light cameras are pretty straightforward for the most part. First and foremost is to reduce collisions, injuries, and fatalities that happen at intersections. And then the idea is that enforcing these violations will eventually improve driver behavior and in turn create a safer community. So prior to implementing a program or finding a solution really requires an in-depth understanding of the problem. And so to explore red light collisions occurring in Pullman, I analyzed police collision report data. So this data comes from police traffic collision report forms, or PTCR forms. These forms are required under Washington law to be filled out by officers investigating vehicle collisions that meet certain criteria. The statewide electronic collision and ticket online record system, called Sector, automates that collision and traffic citation reporting process for law enforcement, and then acts as a central data server. So this data is really considered invaluable as it's often used as the basis for developing proper traffic laws and ordinances, traffic safety programs, and other collision prevention programs. So I was able to access sector collision data for Pullman between 2016 and 2020. Over the course of 4 years, there was a total of 1,363 collisions occurring in Pullman. 77% of those were reported to have no apparent injuries, and about 3.6 of those involved a pedestrian. But the question is really more how many of all of these collisions occurring in Pullman are happening at red light intersections and are caused by people running red lights. Essentially, to understand if there's a problem, we're asking how dangerous these red light intersections are in Pullman. So to address this question, I was able to analyze the data by looking at collisions occurring at signaled intersections where in the collision report, any of the drivers involved disregarded signs, signals, or stop and go lights. So in exploring all the information available in this data set and by reviewing that collision report manual, this was really the most inclusive way to try and capture any and all collisions related to red light intersections and running. So this resulted in 23 collisions between 2016 and 2020. 7 of those resulted in either possible or minor injuries, and 1 resulted in a fatality, which was the only fatality that actually occurred between 2016 and 2020 entirely. So to further explore those 23 collisions, I then went through each police report narrative included in sector, as well as the collision type details in the reports. So in the table on the right, I briefly described the causes listed in those reports. You can see that in 16 of the 23 collisions, the reporting officer states clearly that one of the units involved ran a red light. In the other cases, you can see that the descriptions vary. So for example, 2 of the cases refer to when you're taking a left turn and you're yielding to that oncoming traffic and not able to get out before the light turns red. Another collision had to do with being stuck in an intersection. So when the light's green and somebody proceeds forward, but traffic's backed up, so people are stuck in that intersection. That was one of the cases between 2016 and 2020. So after analyzing the data and further exploring those narrative reports, 16 of the 1,363 collisions in Pullman that are happening at signaled intersections between 2016 and 2020 were clearly stated as being due to red light running. This is about 1.17% of collisions. In determining the use of red light cameras, cities will determine the most dangerous intersections. So in the table on the left, you can see that there are 4 intersections that had multiple collisions. And then the table on the right lists all 16 locations where the collisions occurred. In the far right column, I included injury information for each collision. So of those 16, 11 resulted in no injuries, and 4 of them resulted in possible injuries. As I previously mentioned, that collision in 2020 resulted in the 1 fatality. A few other notes about this data. 0 out of these 16 collisions involved a pedestrian, and I thought it was interesting that none actually occurred in 2017 at all. To note a few of the data limitations, this is not an examination of violation data, so I do use the word violation, but I'm referring to collision details where a violation is clearly stated. I'm not able to speak to red light violations in general, and I did not examine the angle that the collisions occurred at. So I would say the evaluation research on red light cameras is mixed and complicated. This mostly has to do with the limitations of the study methodologies and the variance of outcome measures. The most common types of studies used are called controlled before and after designs. This is where data is collected at intersections without cameras and at intersections with cameras, both before and after the red light camera has been implemented, in order to evaluate the impact that they're having. Studies also vary in terms of what they're evaluating red light cameras to have an impact on, but most commonly studies do look at the impact on collisions. Interestingly, very few look at economic outcomes or the impact on violations. So going through every single evaluation that exists on red light cameras would be really time consuming, and each of them would have several confusing kind of contextual details to explain. So thankfully, in 2020, a research team actually conducted a systematic review to examine the effect of red light cameras on various outcomes. A systematic review is really helpful because it summarizes the results of several red light camera studies and clarifies the main takeaway of all the existing evaluation research on the topic. So in their review, they included 38 studies covering 41 evaluations up to 2015. 37 of the 38 studies were those controlled before and after designs, and only 3 of them reported on violations, while the rest of them were looking at collisions. The authors also conducted a risk of bias assessment, where they analyzed the research design for each study to essentially determine if the methods were appropriate, valid, and trustworthy. So these are the overall results on red light camera violations. I know it looks like a lot, but basically all that matters is the bold arrows you see there. These bold arrows are the statistically significant results. Basically, that just means with a certain level of confidence, we can say that those ones are not due to chance. Red light cameras are associated with a 20% decrease in total injury crashes, a 24% decrease in right angle crashes, and a 29% decrease in right angle injury crashes. But conversely, red light cameras are associated with a statistically significant increase in rear end crashes of 19% is the increase. Lastly, the authors found that there is some evidence from 2 studies that red light cameras may reduce violations. One study was conducted in 1992 and reported a significant decrease of 61%, and another study was conducted in 1999 reporting a non-significant decrease of 47%. So this is just a research summary again. The majority of studies on the red light camera effectiveness included in the review were found to use weak methods and to have a risk of bias. The authors conclude with a few final suggestions. First, that the potential benefits of red light cameras should be weighed against the increased risk of other crash types, and they suggest that policymakers and practitioners need to use evidence from better quality studies. So beyond the evaluation research, there are a few other factors that are important to consider. To start is the impact on agency workload. So this is an example of a contract between Seattle and the American Traffic Solutions, ATS, which is a red light vendor. So what this section is explaining is that police departments in the city need to process each potential violation within 3 business days. So although a benefit and a main purpose of red light cameras is that they permit police to remotely enforce traffic signals, which potentially frees them up to engage in other activities, even so, it's important to consider that time still will have to be spent at the agency reviewing the violations. So for an example, in Salem, Oregon, where they were operating 3 red light cameras in 2020, they had 3 part-time reserve police officers on rotation to review these violations. Additionally, the court system is going to be responsible for a portion of the workload. This is an example of that same contract between Seattle and ATS. And this section explains that the courts must facilitate a judge and a location to hear disputed citations, handle inbound and outbound phone calls about disputes and any other issues related to red light cameras, and the court is also responsible for pursuing delinquent collections of unpaid notices. Across the bottom are examples I was able to find demonstrating how the implementation of red light cameras has influenced court workloads. So in Renton, it was stated that red light camera programs caused employees to work a lot of overtime, weekends, and nights, and the city ended up adding 2 new full-time staff after the court's request. In Des Moines, a judge stated that the court workload increased 300% in case filings due to red light cameras. They were operating 5 cameras, though. And then in Salem, they hired one full-time court operations specialist dedicated to handling red light camera violations. And they were actually budgeting for one more position in the future. So another consideration really has to do with public support and perceptions. There's been a few studies conducted examining public attitudes toward red light cameras. In a 2011 study, researchers found that 42% of survey respondents were strongly in favor, and the main reason for opposition was belief that the motivation behind camera implementation was revenue and not safety. Revenue generation is definitely the most prominent source of controversy regarding red light camera programs. One major story occurred in Seattle around 2008 when traffic engineers admitted to shortening yellow light times by half a second. Another factor impacting public support has to do with fundamental fairness and due process. This is because, as stated in that RCW, the registered owner is responsible for the fine, and if they weren't driving, it's still their responsibility to prove that they weren't driving. So this could potentially take personal time and resources to prove that they're not guilty. Lastly, I wanted to touch on traffic enforcement versus education. Officers can educate drivers when they make traffic stops by explaining to them the purpose of the laws and the dangers of violating traffic laws. The idea is that this educational approach could potentially improve community relations. So in the red box in the corner are just a few questions aimed to understand the underlying causes of the problem. First, asking why people run red lights may lead to more applicable solutions or reveal different, more pressing problems within a city. And in terms of who is running red lights, this could result in a targeted educational response with the program. Once the problem is substantiated and efforts are made to understand those underlying causes, cities would have to determine the appropriate solution. I just wanted to briefly mention some of the alternatives to red light cameras. I think each of these could have their own entire research presentation. But these include increasing yellow light times, adding an all-red clearance interval, making traffic lights more visible, improving intersections, and retiming traffic signals. So just to quickly review what I've gone through so far, in examining that local data, about 1.17% of collisions between 2016 and 2020 occurred at signaled intersections and were caused by red light running. Evaluation research on red light cameras is considered weak and unclear. There are many factors to take into consideration prior to implementation. I only highlighted two, including workload and public perceptions. And lastly, understanding the root cause of the problem in order to substantiate the need for a certain solution is critical. And in doing so, it's important to consider those alternatives as well. So moving forward from this research, in the research, it's repeatedly highlighted that public knowledge of the implementation of red light cameras is considered essential for program success, and this also includes data transparency throughout the life of a program. I think if a Pullman community survey is conducted, this could potentially be an avenue to gather information regarding public concern or public support for red light cameras. And given all of the important factors to consider surrounding the topic and this weak research that exists, a consultant could potentially examine city data in depth to help determine the appropriate solution. This would include going far beyond the collision data that I was able to summarize and looking at things like violations, associated costs, and including the potential impacts on workloads. Lastly, the research that does exist also really demonstrates the need for highly strategic implementations of red light camera programs, especially in terms of data collection and tracking in order to holistically understand what the impact is. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, questions of Megan? Okay, go to Nathan first.
Thank you, Megan. This is really impressive. I'm kind of a data nerd, so I love seeing this. I did have two questions. One is, did you look at what periods of the year accidents occurred most? That's the first question. Second question is, did your data include extenuating circumstances like, I don't even know if police have this, weather conditions, so on, so people don't stop, in ice and so on and so forth. So just those two questions.
Yeah, those are both good questions. That type of information is included in those report forms and in the data set themselves. It would just be a matter of going back and analyzing, looking at those types of questions. Yeah, you can look at things like was there snow on the road, things like that. Of the 23, I didn't necessarily summarize by month, but again, it is definitely possible with that data to go back and look at, are they happening in the summer more often, in the winter, things like that. So, yeah.
Okay. Eileen.
Yeah, Megan, this is great, and the silver lining here is sometimes data tells you what you want to hear, and sometimes it tells you what you need to know. And this is one that tells us what we need to know. The workload associated with this, I don't think makes Pullman a good candidate. This was kind of my baby. Doesn't make Pullman a good candidate for red light cameras at this time. But the alternatives that are suggested here, I think, are things that we could all do relatively easily and inexpensively, and I don't know why we don't do them. And one of my frustrations with traffic data, and as all the engineering staff knows that I've been looking at a lot of traffic data over the last month or more, is it's all based on crashes. And there's a lot of other things that go into our quality of life in our downtown, other than the number of crashes, which is mercifully small. It's a very small data set, which is a good thing, but it doesn't really tell us that we need to do something like red light cameras. But if we're looking for quality of the pedestrian experience in our downtown, some of these alternatives look great. And again, they would be simple and easy to do. And I'm copying your list. I'm going to take it. I'm going to shop it around to anybody who will stand still.
Yeah.
So this was a real silver lining for me to see this. Good. Because anybody that stands down there on the corner, and everybody knows which corner I'm talking about, you will see red light running at every light change, at nearly every light change. And when we realign those crosswalks, that'll help. But also if we had these intervals, as you suggest here, just exactly, and we could do those tomorrow. They could be done, I believe we do. Do we have the gear to do that? Can we put in the yellow light interval? Can we change those? And as I know, we've talked about this many, many times, and the community is asking for this, and as an addition to the other traffic calming measures that we have on the board. So this really bolsters that community. Those comments, these align very well with the comments we've heard from the community.
Okay. Ann.
Megan, thank you so much. I read this several times, and it just was really impressive, the way you put it all together, and also very approachable, which I did appreciate. I just have two questions related to your report. You mentioned that the infraction is, you referred parking infractions instead of moving violations for red light camera violations. Did I misunderstand that, or?
If I am remembering right, I think you might be referring to in the RCW, it stated that the
yes.
fines for red light camera violations cannot
be more.
exceed the parking infraction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then the second question is, you said that the registered owner is responsible, and if they're not the driver, and if the registered owner proves that they're not the driver, then does the infraction just go away, or do they charge the driver? Do you know?
That's actually a really good
I
question.
was just curious. Not that it's that
I
important,
don't
but,
actually
okay.
know the answer.
Mayor,
Oh,
it would be dismissed.
it would be
The
dismissed.
infraction would be dismissed.
Okay, thank you.
I had a couple of questions. When you mentioned earlier that Salem was spending $4,000 a month on these red light cameras, you also mentioned that they had to hire 3 part-time police officers just to review the data. Was that part of the $4,000 a month, or is that in addition?
That would be in addition. So that
Wow.
about $5,000 per month was just kind of like operating costs for these cameras monthly.
One other thing that I know I do, and it's one of those things that, again, it's one of those easy solutions. I look at the pedestrian countdown when I'm coming to an intersection, and I can see, oh, it's already at 0. I'm slowing down, ready for the thing, because usually it's going to hit about that time. And I'm wondering how that has impacted some of the research in terms of the pedestrian countdowns that are now on those intersections, and hoping more people do that so they don't speed through.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's a great question.
Okay.
I think something else I thought about a lot in terms of there being a lack of empirical research related to costs associated with it. Workload, there's not a lot of research out there. If it is something to move forward with, it would be interesting to get a hold of a similar sized community in Washington State that's doing this, kind of get a better feel for what their workload is and their actual costs are. Because
It is interesting to see the number of red light cameras going down over the nation.
It's just too
But the other thing, the school zone cameras, that's a different process, and I know that's done by private companies. And I've seen those in different places. It's not the same kind of company that does the red light camera.
yeah, I don't think so.
Okay. I was just wondering if those numbers have gone up, because it seems like they're available in so many places.
Right.
Okay. No other questions? Then thank you, Megan, very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Very illuminating, really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, we next move to the financial updates for the first quarter. And John Davis is here.
Good evening. Let me see if I can get to this. There we go. Oops. Yep. I just about had it. Second. Perfect. Thank you. This is for first quarter 2022. And I'm going to ask that questions be held till the end, and then I can take some questions if you have any. Let's see, this is my first go-round of this financial update. If it'll go. There we go. I'm going to start out with the general fund revenues. I will go over the general fund as a whole, and then some of the individual departments within the general fund for the revenues. Then I'll switch to expenses for the general fund, do the same thing with the individual groups. And then we'll switch to a couple of the individual departments that are outside of the general fund. For the general fund revenue budget, it was $3.4 million. The collection rate was at 118% on our estimates. These were likely due to some of the items. I am on my wrong page, I'm sorry. The admission taxes were up for that first quarter. We had that collection rate at 101%, and then we also had the ambulance collection rate that was up 114%, and then that gave us the total collection rate of 118%. We have some of the other contributors to the increase in revenues for the quarter is, as always, the timing of the receipts of the funds. Being cash basis, it's when the money comes in that it hits our GL now. It's not, there are no gap comparators in there anymore. So this is going to make it vary from year to year depending on when payments are received and when that revenue type cycle is happening. I also wanted to note that I did remove the ARPA revenues as well as the airport pass-through funds because those greatly change this number. And this gives us a better view of general fund activities. For the sales tax revenues, we had the budget estimated at 1.2 million, and we did collections of 1.3 million. This was about 110% increase, or at 110% of the estimates. So on our sales tax figures, they include the decrease of one-time construction activities during the first quarter of 51.9%. But as compared to 2019, it was only 12.1% decrease, which 2019 is before the pandemic, so we wanted to put that information in there. even with these decreases, we still recognized an overall increase in the prior year first quarter figures. And then for property tax revenues, we were down for the first quarter. This is because property taxes are not due until the second and fourth quarters. So the items that we do receive during the first and third quarters are going to be related to past due accounts. And so during the first quarter, the $80,000 that were down is just because there were fewer accounts receivable type collections done by the county. I also wanted to note in here the unemployment rates for Whitman County for March was at 4.2% versus the state's 4.3%. And then this item is critical to the general fund operations as well as meeting our general obligation bond debt. The next area is the utility tax revenues. We had a collection rate of 131%. Natural gas tax was up 101%. And then the electricity over the same period versus the prior period was up 11%. We did note that the city-owned utility tax collection was also up slightly, up 8%. These items do also touch into the street fund and, where am I? Sorry about that. And they come up in it later, the transit fund, sorry, the street and transit funds, so they do affect those as well. For building permits, we were down as compared to the previous year, and the collection was at 85.6% of estimates. While this metric does provide insight to the future activities like one-time construction, sales tax collections, the timing of the actual permit issuance can create some of these changes. So we'll be keeping an eye on this one fairly closely as we go through each of the quarters. Now I will go through the expenses for the general fund. As you can see from the chart here, I have expenses that are up over last year. And it's important to note that staff postponed purchases during the first quarter of '21 related to the continuing pandemic, and thus as we're moving into this more normalized state of expenditures and revenue recognition, we are going to see this increase over our expenditures in the majority of the funds. I did find that the general fund expenditures are at 98% of our estimated or budgeted amounts. This is because staff has been more strategic in their budgeting practices than they have been in past years. This started during the last couple of years, has been more and more strategic, and we're continuing this through the budgeting process. And now over the next few slides, I'll break down some of those individual department expenditures again. I have here for the legislative expenses that they are up 5% over the prior year, with the expenditure rate of 226.9% of the estimates. And these are being related to the increase in election and voter registration costs that the Whitman County Auditor is charging us. For law enforcement, did I go back? Hold on. I think I went 2 slides. There we go. Finance and administration expenses. The 22 expenditures were at a rate of 86.2% of the prior year expenditures. This is due in part to the communications department being added to this group, as well as the fact that Mike was both the city administrator and the finance director during the first quarter, so that expense was not there. The work was, the expense was not. And then for law enforcement, in the first quarter of '22, we have law enforcement expenditures are up 27% over the previous year's first quarter numbers, and we're at 105% against our estimates. These increases are attributable to increased costs of the Left One retirees items, and then insurance increases, Whitcom accounting for Whitcom, and then as well as some of the overtime and staffing costs. Fire and ambulance, where expenditure rates are at 95% against estimates. Over the same period, the expenditures are up 7.6% over last year. These increases are attributed again to insurance increases, Whitcom costs, as well as the staffing and overtime expenses. And then we have community and economic development expenses. While there's an increase of expenses over 21, the department is only at 98% of their expenditure rate when compared to the budgeted amounts. These increases over 21 are due to the recognition of the GIS staff in this department. Library expenses. These expenses are an increase of 28% over the prior year. They're at 91% against their budget estimates, but this is all the increase over the prior year is attributable to the resuming of the normal business operations from that prior period where we were shut down during that time in 21. This also affects the Parks and Rec Department, which is our next one. Same item where Parks and Rec was shut down by the state mandated shutdowns, and they have this significant increase over the prior period. However, they are well within their budgeted amounts for the quarter. And those, again, the staffing costs and other operations have resumed, and so that is showing up here. I'm now going to go into the streets and arterial streets departments. We're going to switch the order we're doing this in. Each department, I'll do a revenue, and then I'll do the expenditure, so you can see those side by side for each department. For the streets revenues, the first quarter provided a 15% increase over the prior year's first quarter and had a collection rate of 121% of the estimated revenues. As presented earlier, there is a utility tax component to this department, which created part of this increase. Additionally, the REIT revenues, the real estate excise tax revenues are up 82.8% for that quarter. This could be due to timing, but we will see as we go through the year. We did note that during the first quarter, fuel tax is down and is still off the highs, and the cost per gallon is up from the prior lows, so we'll see how this affects the next few quarters going forward. And for the streets expenses here, they are up 40% over the prior year's quarters with the expenditure rate of only 76% of their budgeted estimate. The increase is likely due to the snow and ice removal. We had the extended winter needs. And so additionally, this is where the project downtown consulting is being posted, as it's related mostly with streets. So that is in these numbers here as well, because we started seeing those expenses at the end of March. And then for the utility fund revenues, we're going to switch to utilities. They are down 1% from the prior year. And the collection rates are only at 67% of the estimates. The bulk of the lower collection rate is due to the incomplete projects in our utility fund, projects fund. These are funded by grants and the grant funds cannot be received until the projects are done. The projects are postponed or not getting completed, so we're not getting the grant revenue. So we should see that in the future quarters. Additionally, the utility shutoff process resumed in February. So we had many payment plans requested and completed. I worked closely with Community Action Center and city staff to bring those accounts current during Q2. We have a few that are still outstanding and running around, working through their payment plans, but they are continuing to be resolved. And then, as noted in the papers a week or two ago, there are some new funds available. Those CV1 funds are being available to some residents here. So if there are still folks in need of that assistance, Community Action Center can be reached at the phone number on the screen, or by contacting me, I can get you in touch with, or get you the number as well. The front desk here can at the City Hall. Oops. That is sensitive. For the expenses, as noted above, many of the utility projects are postponed due to the weather and whatnot. So there were some supply chain issues as well. So those expenditure rates are down. So we're only at 47% against estimates here. However, the expenditures were up 31% over the prior year's first quarter. This is due to the accounting reclassification of the 2018 bond payments and the creation of the M&O business section. That's created quite a difference there. Moving on to transit, the revenues were down 13% over the prior period. This is attributable to the decrease in the WSU transit contract and is offset slightly by the Pullman School District transit use. The rate of collection is 110% of estimated due to the resuming of the normal operations of the state due to state shutdown orders being gone. Expenditures for transit were at 101% of the budget estimate, but we're down 17% over the prior year. This is largely due to the decrease in the capital purchases. And then the internal service fund expenditures were budgeted at $1.2 million. They had an expenditure rate of 97%, and this was an increase of about $204,000 over the prior period. But it's all attributable, again, to that supply chain issues that are going on, the timing of the orders, the microchip shortages, and those items coming in and being received this year rather than last year when they were ordered. And then I have the Civic Improvement Fund revenues. We were only budgeted at $35,000. Our collection rate is 287% of estimates, and we're up 106% over the prior year's items. The first, we're looking at this is likely due to, again, that resuming of the normal business operations, because this is largely funded by the hotel motel taxes, and so with them being able to open up, more people traveling, they're getting more revenue, so we're getting more taxes. And then for my final thoughts. Just a reminder that there's many changes from 21 to 22. They're directly related to the lifting of the restrictions, so we're operating under closer to normal conditions now. However, there's still no direct financial help from the state. We do have the American Rescue Plan funds that are available for use. They are available for a longer period of time this go-round. And we're working with Welsh Comer agreement to get parameters for the project downtown Pullman going. And based on the council's goals and priorities, management staff has also been collecting additional projects that might be able to be used with that, dependent on what comes out from the Welsh Comer Consulting. And then we do have a slight change to our CIP and budget calendar, which is in the consent agenda. It's just a small change. And that's coming up, and we're still on track with that budget plan. And then the last thing is the rising cost of inputs. I want to remind everybody that with inflation, it's increasing our costs from raw materials all the way up to our salaries. We're continuing to monitor the market conditions and addressing this during the budgeting processes. It's just a quick note on that, and so thank you for your time, and are there any questions?
Any questions? See none? Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Next on the agenda is the public comment period. This is for who would like to make any comment on any final action the council may take tonight. And that would be actually items 1 and 4 on the previous agenda, because items 2 has been pulled and item 3 is under discussion, and anything on the consent agenda. Is there anybody who'd like to make a public comment? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment at this time. And now we move to consent agenda. These items are considered routine in nature. Do I hear a motion to read by title only?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, Laura McAloon, our city attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. Your consent agenda consists of a motion to dispense with the reading of the minutes of the regular meeting of June 28, 2022, and approve them as submitted. A motion to approve the transfer of sales tax revenue to CIP Reserve Fund for 2022 Quarter 2 in the amount of $323,892. A motion to approve disbursements for accounts payable checks numbered 107173 through 107182, electronic transfers 6768 and 880 through 884, payroll direct deposits numbered 77663 through 78005, totaling $951,102.34. A motion to approve disbursements for accounts payable checks numbered 107183 through 107207, totaling $34,137.44. A motion to adopt the revised 2023 through 2024 biennial budget schedule, and a motion to accept the Rainy Park Pool Complex Improvements contract as complete.
Is there any item the council would like on for discussion? Seeing none, the consent agenda consists of items 1 through 6. Do I hear a motion to approve?
So move.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we now move to our regular agenda. First item from Chief Gary Jenkins. We'll be dealing with an ordinance relating to security alarm systems.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening again, council. The registration of both fire and security alarms is required in Chapter 8 of Pullman City Code. Fire alarm registration is also required in Chapter 3 of Pullman City Code, and that occurred with the adoption of the International Fire Code. Staff proposes amendments to City Code to eliminate the redundancy of the fire alarm registration requirements. A review of the code also prompted other proposed amendments. I provided council with a brief summary of some of those amendments, and I'll just point out a couple. One is that we are tying the penalties to classes of civil infractions rather than specific amounts, and this is something that the city attorney is working on city code wide, so that all fines can be tied to the classes of civil infractions, so that when we need to review and update, we just need to make changes to those amounts rather than going through each individual code and individual amounts. Another change is we have been regulating and requiring registration for both security and fire alarms, and this is staff time that has a cost to it, but we have not been charging for this previously. And so this also adds a cost recovery alarm registration fee of $15 and an annual renewal fee also. And then with the tying of the fine amounts for false alarms to the civil infractions, those fine amounts have increased as well from what we currently have. So for example, after 5 false alarms, currently in a 6-month period, it's a $50 fine. The new proposal is after 5, it will be a Class 2 civil infraction and a $250 fine over a 1-year period. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, and do I hear a motion on this ordinance?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Laura?
Ordinance number 22-15, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Pullman, Whitman County, Washington, relating to security alarm systems, amending Pullman City Code Sections 8.15.010, 8.15.020, and 8.15.030, amending City of Pullman Ordinance Numbers 97-4, Sections 1 and 2, 1997, 87-28, Sections 5 through 7, 1987, 82-49, Section 1, 1982, 81-29, Section 1, 1981, 81-28, Section 1, 1981, repealing Pullman City Code Section 8.15.040, repealing City of Pullman Ordinance Numbers 97-4, Section 3, 1997, 87-28, Section 8, 1987, repealing a portion of City of Pullman Ordinance Number 81-28, Section 1, 1981, adding Chapter 6.99 to the Pullman City Code and providing for other matters properly related thereto.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? If you had an agenda from a day or so, you had item number 2, which deals with dangerous animals. That has been pulled from discussion tonight. And item number 3, which is an ordinance that talks about traffic, that has been moved to discussion item. So the next item under discussion tonight, and one that we will take action on, is item number 4 listed, but on the computer right now it says number 3. And that's an ordinance dealing with creating a salary commission for elected officials. With that, our city administrator, Mike Urban.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. Before you tonight for your consideration is Ordinance 22-18, which would create a new Chapter 1.58 in our city code under Salary Commission for elected officials. So essentially, there's 2 ways by RCW that address compensation for elected officials for the city of Pullman. The first way is where the seated body would take action and create an ordinance that would take effect after the next election for the positions that the body represents. So for instance, if this council were to take action today and say we're going to increase the salaries, the 5 members that are up for election in 23 plus the mayor, those folks, whoever were elected in 23 and started on January 1st, 24, would receive that benefit. The remaining 2 council members that ran in 25 and whoever was elected would receive that benefit starting January 26. So that's the first method. That's the way that this council has traditionally over the years taken action on this. In fact, the last time that happened, city council members was January 1st of 2016, where a new salary took effect. And for the mayor, it was January 1st of 2008. So alternatively, there's also an RCW that allows for the creation of an independent salary commission to set the salaries of the elected officials. So the Independent Salary Commission can provide regular, timely notification of changes in salaries for the elected officials to help with the budgeting process, thus taking the pressure off of the elected officials and giving it to that independent group to study as comparatively to the current salaries, comparable salaries of other elected officials in similar cities, the workload of the elected officials, and they would set the salary based on their independent research. So tonight's proposed ordinance is in concurrence with the RCW, and we've also taken some additional steps. The proposal is an independent salary commission would conduct business without interference of the elected officials while considering compensation. The research, support, assistance to this independent salary commission would be provided by city staff to help assure that all relevant information is available to this appointed commission as they're considering any changes in salary. The city has proposed language to make sure the process is more than transparent. In fact, the city has also encouraged language in here that all meetings would be open, all communications from the salary commission regarding any increases in salary would be for public information. And we've also included an extra step of taking public input before any final decision is made. Pretty complicated issue. But the state has done a lot to protect communities through our CW, and we've looked at it even further. And city attorney and I have been very, very thorough with this. And so based on our work, staff is recommending approval of Ordinance 22-18 as presented, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions of Mike. And first of all, Megan, please.
So Mike, question more out of curiosity about this commission and people who are appointed. Is it primarily staff?
No, as per the ordinance, it would be members of the community who, and I want to get this right, qualified electors, so they live in the city limits and they could stand for election if they chose. They can vote. If they wanted to run for council, they could.
Okay.
The county has had a salary commission for, decades, it seems like. And they've been doing this for quite some time. And they've had an independent salary commission that has basically come up with the recommendations. And I think some of you have read that. So, any other questions? Okay. Eileen?
Yeah, percentage-wise, about how many communities of this size, 36,000, have a salary commission as opposed to how we were previously operating? Take your best guess, Mike.
I could give you my best guess based overall, but not in the community.
Okay.
For that, I would say we're, not counties, but cities. I would say salary commissions are somewhere between 25 and 33%. A lot of communities still do it the method that they've done in the past, and the community I left still did it that way, and for years we didn't take appropriate action on that because it just felt very uncomfortable as a council doing it. So
Does it feel like a growing trend?
Yes.
Okay.
Very much it's a growing trend, and because of the protections the state has put in, it makes it really, the independent part is really above board.
Great, thanks.
No other questions? Do I hear a motion on this ordinance?
Move to adopt 22-18.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Laura?
Ordinance number 22-18, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Pullman, Whitman County, Washington, relating to Title I Administration, creating a new Chapter 1.58 Salary Commission for elected officials, and other matters properly related thereto.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you, council. I'll begin working on recruiting members so we can stay on schedule.
Okay, we now move to discussion items. And first on the revised discussion item list, and I'm sorry, Art's going to come up, you're going to come up second. I just want to make sure you know that, okay. First was Gary Jenkins, and we're talking about the traffic proposal.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Earlier this year, the city was advised by Whitman County District Court that the city's parking and traffic violations needed to be revised by city code. Historically, officers had referenced a single code citation for a violation of any provision of the model traffic ordinance adopted by the city. However, when District Court recently transitioned to a new case tracking system through the Washington Administrator of the Courts, the court could not use the same city code citation for the various traffic offenses under the model traffic ordinance. Therefore, staff has prepared a draft ordinance revising Title 12 of the City Code to add separate code sections and citations for each offense previously cited under the Model Traffic Ordinance. Concurrent with the City Code update, an updated parking penalty fee schedule will need to be adopted, and staff has prepared a recommended schedule for the council's consideration. The draft ordinance and penalty schedules are presented for review and feedback from the council, and staff will bring back a final ordinance and resolution at a future council meeting for action that reflects any council feedback and edits. The 3 penalty amount columns in the penalty schedule reflect first, second, and third and subsequent offenses. And I'll note that the last time we amended fines was in 2018. We did have some other amendments that were done in 2019 that were essentially some cleanup of those fines, but really the last increases that were made were in 2018. The draft parking penalty schedule reflects mostly the same penalties that were adopted in 2018, with a few exceptions that there was a few that were just increased modestly. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So just for clarification on the draft parking penalty schedule that you have there, for just the first time overtime downtown 12-hour parking on Spring Street lot, you have 30, and then it went to 50, and then the proposal is for 100. Or what?
Well,
I just
30
wanna
would
make
be
sure
for
that-
their first violation,
Okay,
50 a second violation, and then 100 for a third violation.
I see. Under a certain time period, full year, what?
Yeah, we, in fact, Laura, did we come to I think we're going to handle that administratively, is that right?
And we're setting that up as a calendar year?
So issuance of the infraction and the level of infraction is at the officer's discretion. So they're generally going to follow it, but it's difficult to put it into city code in terms of the time frame when you could have that, because you could have, if you say July 1, you could have someone who had an offense in May, an offense in June, and then an offense in August, and the August one would be cited as a first offense if you set up a specific date. So it'll be the officer's discretion looking at the history of that specific individual.
Other questions? Okay, Nathan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, this is great. I do have a question, and it more relates to, some people are very scared to stay downtown after they've been drinking, and so they choose to get in their cars, so on and so forth. Now, I know we've had a certain forgiveness of if you leave your car down there overnight because you've been drinking. Is that still something that can be discussed, or?
Well, that's something that's difficult to codify. However, I do have some discretion in that area, and it's been my practice to forgive those situations involving someone rather than having them be drinking and driving.
I really appreciate you mentioning that, and I know that question arises quite a bit, so thank you.
Other comments or questions? You've gone through the penalty schedule. Does that appear to be, I know compared to WSU penalties for parking, this is really minor compared to those kind of, I had a friend of mine who was here for a meeting, and he called me up and he says, "Can you believe what they," yes, I do. But you have to pay them within, 24 hours, and it goes reduced by 50%, but it's still much higher up there. So any other comments? Are you okay with, yes? Pat, please.
Thanks, Chief. Good summary on this. But the one question I have, and I'm trying to find it on the list here, was there's a violation of oversized vehicles or RVs with a 96-hour time frame. When does the clock start on that? When the vehicle is reported, or how do we do that one?
When we're able to actually verify that the vehicle was at that location. And so we can't really do it on secondhand information. So typically it's when we go and mark the vehicle.
And that was a $25 fine according to this, oversized vehicle parking. Looks like, on your list.
Mayor,
Yeah.
I think the councilman was talking about the parking over 96 hours.
Oh, I
So
just saw
that's-
oversized vehicle parking in city
There,
lots.
Second
yes, there
page.
is an oversized vehicle one, but then there's also further down the page, parking over 96 hours. That's where a vehicle is left
Okay.
on the street for that period of time. That's a $40 penalty in the schedule.
And that's anywhere in the city, residential also?
Okay, if you are okay with this, then Gary can come back with the final draft. Is that correct? For the next meeting, which will be July
Correct.
19th.
Yes, so we'll have the ordinance in final form, and then we will also have a resolution adopting the parking penalty schedule.
I do
That's-
have one question.
Okay, one more question.
So the gradations of the fine as they go up, that's based on, so like the parking over 96 hours is not as serious as something else, so therefore it's $40 each time it happens? Is that the idea?
Right, and I believe on that particular violation, there's a potential for impoundment as well. Is that right, Lori?
I believe that one is just the 40, 40, 40, but the chief's code enforcement officers, Liz OJ specifically, worked on this penalty schedule in detail, and really where she has recommended, and the police department has recommended, increased penalties for second and subsequent offenses. It's where they see that there's a need for that deterrent. So the fact that she put the same fine for 3 offenses tells me she's not seeing
Not seeing it
that
as much.
penalty, that violation as much as she's seeing perhaps overtime parking in the 12-hour zone.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, then you've heard the council's opinion. Okay. Our next discussion item tonight is Water Smart Energy Efficiency Grant for Advanced Metering Infrastructure Report. Our Garrow's been looking forward to giving you this presentation. He's been warming up because this is something we've wanted to get into for some time. So with that, Art Garrow.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Good evening, council. I'm going to take just a second to see if I can figure this guy out. I have the world's shortest PowerPoint presentation. It's one slide. So just trying to impress Mike. Anyway, I'm here this evening to really accomplish about 5 things. The first of which is to report on the status of the 2022 WaterSmart grant that we submitted last year, and then to provide information about the upcoming grant. So that probably tells you that the 2022 grant wasn't successful. So, so that'll be the second thing we talk about. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the tie between AMI and conservation, and what the benefits of AMI will be to the city. And then just want to answer any questions that you guys have, and encourage discussion. If you have any questions of me or anything you want me to look forward to, or, look at afterwards and get back to you, I'd be more than happy to do that. And then ultimately, I'm interested in getting some guidance from the council on, do you want me to go forward with the grant? And if so, we'd come back at the next council meeting and with a grant authorization, and let you guys, it'd be part of the consent agenda and be presented to you for formal approval. So, okay. With that, I'll get started. And while the slide is one slide and it's brevity, I'm not sure that what I'm going to read here falls under that same thing. But there's a lot of points to this, and I want to make sure that I covered everything that at least I think is stuff that you guys really need to know. As far as the status of the 2022 funding, the Bureau notified me late May that the city's AMI grant application for the 2022 funding cycle was unsuccessful. Subsequently, I scheduled a debriefing meeting with the Bureau of Reclamation, and to discuss the city's application. And in the packet for this council agenda item was a memo that I sent to Sean that really went over every aspect of that debriefing and in detail. However, I want to highlight some of those tonight in this presentation. So, the first thing I want to go over is just kind of how many applications did they get, that kind of stuff, just information. But the 2022 funding cycle, the Bureau received 72 Category 1 applications and funded 15 of those. So for that NOFA, that Notice of Intent, what they defined a Category 1 application was anything up to $500,000. And that's where our grant, where we were looking at. We were looking at right at 500,000. So they funded 21% of them. In addition, the Bureau reduced the funding for the water efficiency grants to water energy and efficiency grants significantly from previous years. So that kind of worked against us too. The reduction resulted from the addition of an additional program to the WaterSmart family, and that was the Environmental Water Resource Project category. So they had more mouths to feed, I guess would be one way to say it. And the WaterSmart grant, and let's see, grant offerings, okay. As I said, the decrease was significant, and I just wanted to kind of give you an example of what I mean by significant. In 2021, they awarded $40 million to the water efficiency grants, water energy and efficiency grants. That was 80% of the funding, so there was $50,000 in funding. In 2022, they awarded $17.3 million to the energy efficiency grants, which was 38% of the amount available. So the funding dropped significantly. So the debriefing included general discussion of each of the 8 scoring criteria, and Mr. German, the guy that I was in the meeting with, was unable to provide scoring breakouts for each of the criteria, which would have been really helpful, but he couldn't provide that information. However, he was able to give feedback on criteria that either scored well, did not score well, and areas the city could focus on for future applications, which was very valuable. Based on his feedback, the 2023 application includes updated water saving estimates and narrative, and a revised energy saving estimates and narrative. While not successful, participating in the application debriefing process for the 22 funding cycle was a great learning experience for me, and I gained a better understanding of the WaterSmart grant process, and I'm confident will help us in the future with our future grant applications to the Bureau. As far as the item number 2, the 2023 grant application and process is almost identical in the 2020 to the 2022 program, with one exception, and it's kind of a minor exception, and it doesn't affect our grant, but the one difference is they have one more category this year, which is Category 3, and it's defined as any project up to $5 million. So, but that doesn't affect us, so that's good. As I previously mentioned, the staff focuses on updating the water saving estimates and narratives and energy saving estimates and narrative. In addition, a revision to the data communication network narrative was implemented, identifying cellular-based or fixed radio-based systems. Unfortunately, the utilization of Avista's REVA network proved to be more complicated than initially thought, and both the city and Avista decided that a different direction was warranted. The decision was not easy and came after much time and effort on behalf of the city and Avista. Avista's team continues to participate in the project as a technical resource. In addition, the project scope and costs were increased to reflect inflation and a completed AMI system rather than the phased approach that we took in the 2022 application. Doing so addresses the comments from the Bureau to increase the water and energy saving estimates and to ensure a shorter implementation period. The estimated total cost of the project is $3,544,805, and the city is requesting $1,595,162 in grant funding from the Bureau. That makes the city's match for the project basically $1,949,643. The estimated water savings for the project totals 115.31 million gallons per year, which is basically 12.5% of our current production rate. And at the 20-year life cycle, and that comes at a 20-year life cycle cost of approximately $1,800 for every million gallons saved. So I thought that was pretty impressive. A draft of the 2023 application is in the document section of this council agenda item. And to ensure the project is shovel-ready, the city plans to complete 3 tasks prior to award of the grant. These tasks include solicitation of proposals and award of a contract for the project. And got one more page there. Don't do. And hang on. The contract will provide a flexible implementation approach due to the possibility of not receiving grant funds. To achieve this, the contract structure will provide for 2 implementation schedules, one reflecting grant-funded project and another reflecting a city-funded project. It is vital to the project to have the AMI provider under contract prior to field work starting, to facilitate creation and implementation of marketing and stakeholder communication campaign to ensure affected customers are aware of progress, impacts that they might be subject to. Once the communication piece is in place, the AMI provider will design and commission a pilot project to demonstrate conformance with the specification and as a proof of the provider's design concepts and equipment performance. Upon successful completion of the pilot and the amount of funds available is determined, the full-scale project will start. At all times during the project, city staff and the AMI provider will continue to communicate with homeowners about install dates and other questions or concerns that surface during the project. We are anticipating some supply chain problems with this project. I have talked to a couple of the vendors, and that seems to be letting up a little bit. But you know, it just depends on who we choose as a provider, how that's going to affect us. But we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that. The other thing I was going to say, we'll probably make a component of the RFP. Scoring could focus on the AMI's provider's ability to secure equipment and deliver the project on schedule. So we could, that's one thing we're talking about, maybe adding. And then, okay, so we're discussing the AMI benefits. Excuse me. Some of the benefits, okay, so AMI installation around the country have reported numerous benefits, both operationally and on the customer side of the meter. Aside from the obvious savings from reduced need for on-site meter reading, the ability to identify not just volume of water consumption, but also timing of the consumption has significant benefits, particularly to customers. Some of the benefits of AMI in relation to conservation include replacing older meters with AMI service meters provides better water usage tracking and the ability to quantify water usage and better identify distribution customer leaks. Installing new meters will provide the city with the ability to accurately read the lower usage flows, ensuring customers are accurately billed for all the water they use. Customers will have direct access to their accounts online to view their own water consumption, manage alert settings, and view helpful videos such as how to detect a leaky toilet. Additional demand data will enable Pullman to optimize operational and energy efficiency of its pumping stations, booster pumps, and to help identify capital improvements in the future. Alert triggers by unusual or continuous usage patterns, which can be indicative of leaks before there is extensive water loss or property damage loss. So we'll get those kind of triggers and alarms too. It allows us to optimize water rates based on actual use and to justify changes in rates for high users, which can allow for equitable use of the system. It eliminates vehicle miles and staff time for manually reading. I'm sorry about that. There we go. Each service meter individually. And then the last kind of thing I just wanted to bring up was more statistic. The estimated water and electrical savings of 2,306,200,000 gallons of water and 560,000 gallons, or $60 worth of electricity over the 20-year planning cycle is kind of where our estimates lead us. And to give you some perspective about the 2 billion number, that's basically 2.5 years of our current consumption. Just that we would realize in the 20-year life of the project. And 560, conversely, $1,000 is about 2.25 years at our current, what we pay for electricity for all the pumping stations in the system. So that pretty much completes it. I appreciate your patience and me, and I just open it up for discussion and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, questions? Looks like Megan's going to her mic first, so we'll get her, and then we'll go to Nathan.
Well, thank you for the report, and it makes perfect sense to me to apply for this again because it's what we need to be doing in terms of water conservation. Two concerns that I have is if we don't get the grant, what's our contingency? What are we going to do? Because we have to start doing these things for water conservation. The second I have is, if we do get it, it's still going to take implementation. It's not going to be right away. What can we start doing right now and it's that whole discussion around behavior and kind of the carrot and the stick, but our constituents are asking, what are we going to do? In terms of changing some behavior and code enforcement, et cetera, in terms of, you still see people watering at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It still blows me away. So, that's a tough behavior to change, obviously, but this is just too important.
Okay, so I can take the first part of that question. I think maybe if Mike or Sean wouldn't mind, I'd defer to the second part of the question to them because they're more closely working on that than I am. As far as what the backup position will be if we don't get the grant, we'll fund it with basically what we were going to be participating, what our match was going to be, and we'll continue to try to get grants. The implementation period will probably double from 2 or 3 years to 6 or 7 years, but it's something we really need to do. I mean, it's really back when I was a young guy in this business, and I programmed a lot of control systems for my past job, and one of the best explanations I heard somebody give about a control system, it really puts like the stuff in your car, the fuel, all those meters and all those things you use to drive, it puts it in front of you so you can make informed decisions. When you're driving down the road and you don't have your speedometer, it's kind of hard to tell how fast you're going. And I think in the same way that SCADA does that for operations and for city, managing the water system, I think this does that for the customer. It puts them in the driver's seat. And I think, if we're going to get really, if we're going to get serious about water conservation, we have to put those tools in their hands.
Okay.
Sean, do you want to finish that off?
Yeah, so just to add to what Art said, this AMI system really is instrumental in being able to implement a water conservation program, especially when you're talking about water use restrictions. So when you start thinking about enforcement actions, if you've got the person that's watering in the middle of the day, or let's say we were to implement a water use restriction program where you water on, if your address is odd, then you water on odd days. If your address is even, you water on even days. If you implement something like that, it's very hard to enforce it unless you have an AMI system, because the AMI system gives you all the data to say exactly when that's happening. So otherwise you're relying on the police force, the code enforcement folks to go out and just hopefully run into these situations. And if you think about driving around in the middle of the night to try to see when people are watering, that gets pretty hard to do. So the AMI system really is essential. Now, to answer the question, if we don't get the grant, then exactly what Art said, we still go forward with the grant. And this first year, our priority is to implement this pilot system. And we want to implement that pilot system really on about 500 meters that we have out there that currently are 100% manually read. Because the rest of our meters in the system, we read by using a driving system where we drive by the meters and we're able to pick up that meter read data. So we've got somewhat of an automated system, but it's not nearly as robust as a full data collection system through AMI. But if we don't get the grant, we'll be implementing it slowly over time.
Okay. Nathan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Art, this is awesome. The AMI, I mean, more information, just as you said. And for me, I want to look at my water use. And I'm one of those people who, when you're first getting into a home or a rental and you're having to take care of like the lawn, some of it is education. So I appreciate what Councilmember Guido said. Is I used to water in the middle of the day. I didn't know any better, So the education that comes along with that and the data that it can provide. And I just wanted to also tell you, I sent this to Sean, shout out to Tim and Johnny, who came in and read my water meter. Scared them a little bit coming out of my house in a tank top. But, they were very professional. You've got some great crews. So I just wanted to tell you, I appreciate what you're doing, your forward thinking, and all of the experience you have. So greatly appreciate it. Keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so
Eileen.
much, Nathan. And I will definitely pass that on to them.
Yeah, this is incredible, and I was so disappointed when we didn't get it last time around. And I've really got my fingers crossed on this. And to kind of bring this to life for somebody, a friend of mine called me it's been about 6 or 8 weeks ago, and she just had this gut feeling. She's a little widow lady. She lives in a big house. That something was wrong with her drip irrigation system. And she's 100% xeriscaped, so she can't really see if there's wet spots out there. Mm-hmm. Well, to make a long story short, she had a $250 water bill. Wow. And so she called her, she has a very reputable service that comes in and does her thing, because she's, like I say, a little old lady. She doesn't do it herself. They came out and worked on it, and then something else happened to the same irrigation system, and her bill the next month was $1,200. Wow.
Nice.
That's how much water can be lost with a drip irrigation system that you can't even see. And if we'd have had this in place, she would have gotten a phone call, or she would have gotten a visit from your team and would have said, hey, what's going on with this? And then, believe it or not, then a week after, she's still kind of working out some details with her people. And then a week after that, we had the thunderstorm, and a whole bunch of systems, automated irrigation systems, failed in the open position. They had about 10 of them that failed in the open position, and that's an incredible amount of water that can be lost in a very, very short amount of time. And this system would have detected that. This is very, very real. I haven't run the numbers as to how many acre feet that $1,200 represents. But it's incredible the savings that can be made even in just those ways, like you said, like a leaky toilet, or like some of the things we can't see, like a drip irrigation system. Our city system is very good. We've got like, what, a 3% leak, 2 to 3% leak is all?
It's starting to go up a little bit.
Oh, no, don't
Four and a
say.
half, but,
Okay,
yeah.
which is incredible, because a lot of municipalities are at 20% or even 30%.
Oh, yeah, we're
Yeah.
extremely low.
So we're really good, and at that 12% a year that we'll be saving in terms of total water use, boy, that brings us a lot closer to that aquifer stabilization, which we're hoping to achieve by 2025 in a very aggressive schedule. So really, everybody keep your fingers crossed for this one. This is huge.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, Ann?
Thank you. Thank you, Art and Sean, for your commitment to this and for keeping it at the top of the priority list. I second what Eileen said. From the insurance perspective, we've had more than a few calls over the years of crawl spaces being completely full, and people didn't know it, right? So, until they got the bill. And so it can happen in lots of different ways and sources, and it's never a good thing. But also, I just lost my train of thought. I guess that's all I was going to say, because I forgot my second point. Oh, I think it might be helpful for us because we haven't gotten the grant dollars before, but we have a bigger ask, and I think that'll be more impactful maybe. You know what I mean? Sometimes grantors look at, well, they're only asking for this much, at least in my experience. So hopefully going for the bigger ask will draw more attention in a positive way.
Well, definitely doing the whole system at once.
Yes.
And how that affected the calculation for total water savings and energy savings.
Yeah.
And he's had some coaching, so that's really good too in the application process. It was very nice of him to reach out like that.
Yeah, it was.
So you're hearing from the council, go forth and get this grant.
All right.
Because you will be hearing some more educational material going out from communications regarding watering and all that, especially dealing with some corporate ones, because I've been pointing some things out to our people that we're seeing during the daytime, which we know that has the maximum evaporation time. You should be only watering at night. When the sun's down, we don't have it, so those messages will be going out again. So with that, thank you very much. And is there any new business to come before the council tonight? Seeing none? Oh, yes, okay.
So this is related more to Jana's financial summary, and I maybe should have brought it up at that time, but one thing that continues to concern me is WITCOM and, increase in overtime and staffing issues, and I know that I don't know if it's gotten better or what. So I was wondering if we could get an update on that in a future meeting.
We can do that at a future meeting, I think, unless you have a new update right now. I know they're still looking for personnel.
No, I can absolutely bring that at a future meeting because as Gary moves off the WITCOM board, I'm going to move back on in that position to help Jake transition, because there is a spot for an ex officio piece for the police chief of Pullman. So Chief Heston and I will be sitting on the board as Jake gets more up to speed. So I'll work with Mike to come up with a presentation.
Great. Thank you.
Any other new business to come before the council? Now seeing none, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we are adjourned.
So Glenn, I had to share with you, one of the Moscow council members is starting to come to the gym, Planet Fitness over here.
Okay.
I thought was kind of funny.